The renaissance of African literature fits into a historical space, which is around the late 90s, early 2000s, which saw the end of military dictatorships and the rise of democracies all over the place. We in Nigeria, we had just transitioned to democracy. So this is where it came from. In the military period, amongst other organizations, the Commonwealth, which was the most prestigious prize, we had been kicked out of the Commonwealth. So there had been this pent-up creative energy which saw an explosion or saw expression when the civilians came back in 1999. And into this we have, I like to date that period from Helen Habila's 2001 winning of the Kane Prize for African Writing. So we date it from that, and in that period you've got Chimamanda Adichie, you've got Isi Osondu, you've got people like me, people like Abubakar, Emmanuel Iduma, and so many other voices. They all fit into this renaissance. Some would call it a fourth generation of Nigerian writing, but it's a general African thing. So yes, on the one hand, this is excellent, but these creative juices that are being expressed, these creative ideas that are being expressed in literature, all right, it has not been matched really by an adequate structure on the continent. We have a continent of a billion, 2 billion people, and yet from my previous response on the challenges of distribution and marketing in Nigeria, it's largely mirrored all over the continent. So we have a situation where the West is interested in this writing. They have more developed markets. They are able to have the corollaries of publishing, whether it's the marketing. They are able to have residency programs. They are able to have fellowship programs where writers can sit down and maybe lecture and work. Now, these are the things that in Nigeria and in Africa, there's not enough of them to go around where they exist. So, a writer can be socially committed, but writers are not really Jesus Christ. So there is a tendency that if you have a good offer from the West for this, and you know that, okay, at least I'm going to be able to read my book in New York and San Francisco and London. Meanwhile, if I sit down just in Abuja, the most I can read is Mina and Lagos. And less people would read my book. A writer wants more people to read their book. So we have this type of situation. So I wouldn't say that the interest of the West is a bad thing per se. I would say that it makes an argument, or it makes an argument for African arguments in the corollaries of publishing, distribution and marketing particularly. The issue of tariffs moving across borders for books, the issues of the cost of taking a flight from here to Kigali, all these trade barriers. If we are serious about creating an African market, whether for books or for culture or for ideas, then we have to look at these things and say these are counterproductive. All right. Now, the minus side of the interest of the West in African writing is the tendency that the person who creates a market determines the rules of that market. It's very, very easy. The piper pays the person who pays for the tune dictates the tune, or some other saying about paying the piper. And this is the tendency. Because the market in the West is extremely sophisticated, because writers are cultural entrepreneurs in a sort, so the issue of representations comes in. If I want to see you in a certain way, if I want to, for example, the issue of poverty porn, where you will always find the CNN story about those Africans killing themselves in wherever it is. So it is a narrative of helpless Africa. They put it out there. Of course, nobody really talks about the multinational corporations that are there sucking the lifeblood out of Africa and paying those same warlords. But the thing is helpless Africa. So you find a situation where the influence of the West, because of the accolades and all of that, creates a force field on African perceptions. So a certain sort of African perception is more likely to be sellable in the West than certain sorts. So to the extent that this influences writers to churn out this type of narratives which are not really honest, I could say that that is a bad influence. But even with that, what this argues is that an African market for African culture has to be created first. If this happens, if an African writer knows that within the continent, he's a Nigerian, he can sell 100,000 books within the continent, I think it's enough reason for him to say, okay, calm down, I don't really need to go to New York. Or if I go to New York, I'm going to New York on my own terms. So it's a multifaceted issue, and I've tried to go over it. So it's not a good or bad thing, but it depends on how it operates, who it's operating on, and in what historical circumstance. The world of the creative arts, whether it's the creative economy as it were, is a really, really vast place. And no matter, the first thing is you have to sit down as a young person and decide where you're going to fit in here. You could be a writer, but do you want to write novels, or would you rather write screenplays? So the first thing is to do a sort of self-assessment. For often than not, people stumble through things and then say, oh no, it's not working, this. But the thing is, they've not taken care to, young people don't often take care to understand themselves, understand these markets that they want to enter. So they just stumble through it and make a mess of it, and then they become discouraged. But the first thing is self-assessment, realistic self-assessment. Then the second thing, I think, for young people is this idea that that they are owed something. But nobody really owes you anything. Nobody owes you anything. The most enduring things are those things that have been created out of thin air. Somebody sits down and says, come, why can't we make movies? Oh my God, my uncle has a camcorder. Okay, you can act. You do this. Suddenly he records it, he puts it on VHS, and it's a movie, and he makes copies and he sells it. Prior to making that decision, it didn't exist. Suddenly, out of thin air, he pulls it out. Same thing with a poet. He walks through the streets, sees all sorts of things. Why is this thing like this? Okay, I am going to write a poem about this. And he writes that poem, and suddenly, out of thin air, it exists. And it's there, and people are reciting it, people are remembering it. Somebody sits down in a dystopian social space with bad politicians and corrupt people. He says, I'm going to write a satire about this so that people can laugh at these people and they would feel bad and hopefully mend themselves. He creates it out of thin air. He did not wait for something to be created and given to him. And this is something that young people need to know. If it doesn't exist, it's not because you don't have to wait for it to be made. Nothing stops you from stepping out there and creating it. But of course, before that, you have to assess yourself. You have to assess the society. So you're not going there with wide-eyed space cadet sort of thing. You're going there with a sense of self and an awareness of the market that you're going into.